Good afternoon. This is Kelly Calloway at the Texas Education Agency, and I have with me a couple of colleagues, Tammy Bright, who is driving this webinar, and Megan Bermia. You have received emails from both of them. You will receive more emails from both of them. And of course, you'll receive emails from me. We're going to get straight to business here in just half a second. Let me just tell you that, just so you'll know, I've been working with the Blue Ribbon Schools program for about 6 years now. My actual role here at the agency is Senior Director of Instructional Materials. But I lucked into, one of those other roles, other duties as assigned hats several years ago, and that was Blue Ribbon Schools, and I've enjoyed it so much and have been able to continue working with that program. And so everything I'm about to show you is based on what I've learned over the past 6 years working with the Blue Ribbon Schools, the USDE Blue Ribbon Schools program, and working with districts' applications. Let me tell you what we're going to do. I hope that you can see a screen that says 2018 Blue Ribbon Schools Application Training. We're going to go through the application question by question, and I'm going to tell you what we've learned about what USDE is expecting to see in your answer. And in many cases, if they don't see what they're expecting to see in your answer, they will return your application to you and ask for more information. If you have the application printed out and in front of you, that might be useful. Or if you can open it so that you can pop into it while watching the webinar, that might be useful. You may want to take some notes, although we will make these slides available to all of you when we finish. So we're going to go through it step by step. Part 1 is just eligibility certification. You just want to make sure on part 1 that you've answered every single question. And for some reason that I can't explain, USDE is really persnickety about your using your 9-digit zip code. So make sure you use all 9 of those digits. Part 2 is demographic data. This is all numbers that you should have access to within your district. There will be somebody in your district who can provide these numbers for you if you don't have them already. And so again, you just want to make sure that every question is answered and answered accurately. If there's something questionable looking about some of the data that you submit, then your application will come back to you and USDE will ask you to re-examine it and make sure that it's accurate. Just so you know, and I've told you this before in an email, but TEA will be reviewing your applications prior to your ever sending them to USDE. So we will look at these things as well, and we'll alert you if anything seems odd or unusual or problematic, and then you'll have a chance to correct that before you have to send them to USDE. And now we're going to get more into the meat of things. Part 3 is the summary. This is one of the most important parts of your application. Think of the summary that you write in Part 3 as your first impression. This is the first impression you're providing USDE of your school. You want to make sure that your narrative, and let me just take the moment to talk about the word narrative. Every one of these questions should result in a carefully crafted essay. I'll tell you that I'm an old English teacher. I taught secondary English for 22 years prior to coming to the agency. And what USDE is looking for in all of these questions, once we get past the numbers questions, is a finely crafted essay. something that answers all the questions, provides all the information, but at the same time flows and reads like a carefully crafted essay. And so you're going to want to get your best writers to help you work on these. We can talk a little bit about the best approach to take to try and make sure that happens. But I'm going to encourage you during the webinar to use the question feature in your webinar app. And if you will type in questions while we're talking, then at the end of each little section, I will try to stop and provide some answers to those questions. Certainly at the end of the webinar altogether, we'll try to provide answers to those questions. So you're going to want to make sure, that this first narrative includes the nature of your community and the kinds of students that you serve, that it places the school in a historical and geographical context, and that it gives an overview of the demographics of the school and the community as a whole, and what kinds of opportunities or challenges those demographics provide to your school. You're going to want to make sure the narrative includes traditions, milestones, or history. So if you have traditions that are important to your school body, then that's one of the things you want to write about in this first narrative. If you have milestones that your school has met over the course of the past 10 or 15 or whatever years, big important events that have occurred within your school, those would go in this section. The history of your school, we had one this past year, one of our 2017 Blue Ribbon schools that started off as a purely segregated school for Hispanic students. And that was its origin. And of course, over the years, that has changed completely, but they talk about that creation of the school as one thing and evolution of the school into something different. And that was a very powerful story that we got to read about on their application. The question on the screen right now, I'm going to actually pause and go ahead and answer. Is it important to address each bullet in the order in which they appear on the application questions? I have put the bullets in a slightly different, actually, let me back up and tell you two things. What you're going to see on my slides is a combination of information from the application and information from the tips. You may have also in your downloading from the portal, you should have downloaded an application and a tips for good applications. And so what we've done is combine all of that into one set of points for you to try to address. I have put those points in these slides in an order that makes sense and that you might want to try to follow as you're writing your essay. So in other words, if you use these bullet points from these slides as sort of an outline for your essay, I think you'll end up with a smoothly flowing essay that works in a logical order. That doesn't mean this is the only way to do it. You might completely reverse all of this information or throw it on the table and mess it up into a different kind of combination altogether. The important thing is that you cover all this. And if it's helpful, we've put it in the slides in an order that we think makes sense. So the narrative must also explain the educational philosophy of the school. This is one thing that we will look at specifically. Can we point to a sentence or two that describes the educational philosophy? It shouldn't be implied. It should be clearly stated. The narrative needs to include concrete examples of key strategies that help students develop academically, emotionally, physically, socially, and culturally. I split these out into separate bullet points because you're going to want to address every single one of these things. If you leave out emotionally or socially, we're going to send your application back to you and ask you to address those things as well. If you don't have concrete examples, we're going to send your application back and ask you to give us some concrete examples. So in other words, it doesn't just speak in a vague way about trying to support students academically, but it gives an actual concrete example of the academic supports that you provide to students. The narrative also shows how those examples contribute to student success. I'm going to pause here and tell you that these are going to be themes throughout all of these slides. The concrete examples, USDE wants to see facts and concrete descriptions of things like strategies. And then they want every one of those examples to tie into how does that help student success. To say that we, I don't know, have morning announcements every day that are emceed by different students, that's pretty cool, but how does that help the students succeed? The narrative describes special programs offered, unique school day features, etc. You want in this first opening narrative to make sure that you talk about at least one aspect of your school that is completely unique. One aspect that is a super special program. You can talk about more, but this first narrative is, they're asking for a lot in this first narrative. They're asking for you to give a beautiful, complete, whole picture with a lot of detail. And so I think it's one of the hardest ones to write. The narrative clearly tells the story of the school's success. After we've read this first narrative, we need to really understand why you are being considered as a blue ribbon school. We're going to stop here and take a survey question. So Tammy, I'm going to ask you to launch this survey question so that you guys listening in and participating can respond. And it looks like some people are still, nope. We've got 74% of you who have voted, which of course makes sense because some of you have multiple people from the same school. But overwhelmingly, we have nominees this year. And let me ask this question. Can you guys see those poll results? If somebody could just, excellent. Thank you, Stephanie. We have overwhelmingly schools that have not been blue ribbon schools before, so this is all new to you. We have a few schools, 12% of participants out there are from schools that have been blue ribbon schools. And so you have one more thing that you have to talk about in this first narrative. Those of you who have already been blue ribbon schools need to talk about how has that status of being a blue ribbon school affected you? How have you benefited? How has your school benefited from that? How has it benefited your community? How has the status of being a blue ribbon school inspired you to improve even more? How has it affected professional development? How has it affected curriculum and instruction? What are the positive effects that you've experienced since in the 5 years or more since you were named a blue ribbon school? And so that needs to be a separate paragraph that is very clear and very specific that you're addressing this actual question. So this first section is approximately 800 words long. Anything within 100 or so words of 800 is probably going to be fine. These are our length guidances. But if you turn in an essay that's 1,000 words, I think you've not made a good faith effort to meet the word limit. If you turn in an essay that's even 700 or 650 words, then you haven't said enough. You've got room to tell us more, and you want to go back and tell us more. That being said, one of the signs of really good writing is always to be concise, to avoid wordiness, to avoid cliches and phrases that have words in them where the words don't add anything to the meaning. Don't worry about that as you're drafting, but before you say that you are ready to submit an essay, get somebody who's really good at editing, especially for editing those kinds of wordy phrases and extra words that don't add to the meaning. Get somebody who's really good at that sort of thing to give your essay a cleanup, if you will. Kind of think of it as a dog grooming or something. So we will now move on to part 4, curriculum and instruction. This one also has some very challenging questions. It has multiple questions, and each one has to address very specific things. Question 1 is about your core curriculum. So it's about English, math, science, and social studies, but it should also include information on civic learning and engagement strategies. How do you help your kids become good citizens, in other words? That may be something that you address specifically in the social studies section, because you may work on that kind of educational opportunity within your social studies classes. Or this may be something that you talk about in an opening paragraph on this essay. And then you're going to want to address each of these 4 core subjects very specifically. In each one, you're going to need to describe how that subject addresses the TEKS. What the USDE application says is something about the standards, but we know that in Texas, the standards are the Texas Essential Knowledge and Skills. And so you're going to want to talk about how do you make sure that you're teaching the TEKS within each of the 4 subject areas. You're going to want to explain why a particular curricular approach was chosen. This is one of the things that we see schools struggle with. They may be great at describing their curricular approach, but why? Why did you pick this approach? What was the thinking behind choosing this approach, or what were the indicated needs of your students that led you to choose this approach? You need to make sure you address how students acquire foundational skills in each of those 4 subjects. Again, sometimes I see applications where the writers have gotten excited about some really cool aspects of their, I'm going to say, math instruction, but they leave us wondering, how do they gain those foundational skills? Social studies is probably a better example than math. You may do all kinds of awesome projects in social studies, but there are some foundational social studies skills like map reading and research, and you need to make sure that you address how those foundational skills are, how the students are led to succeed with those foundational skills. The most successful responses to this particular question that we've seen are split into 4 or 5 paragraphs covering each section separately. But they're also written with a consistent style and approach. Now, let me tell you what a common pitfall we see. The principal asks the English department to write the English paragraph, and the math department to write the math paragraph, and the science department to write the science paragraph, and you get my picture. When all those paragraphs come together, nobody goes through and makes sure that they blend and that they actually go one with the other. And so we get maybe a really strong math response that does everything just like it ought to, but a really weak English language arts and reading response. And I'm choosing that one because I'm an English teacher, and so I know I'm not going to hurt my own feelings there. That where the writers didn't really understand exactly what was needed in this response. So you're going to want those people to work together. You're going to want to make sure that all 4 paragraphs address the needed subjects in a way that is at least kind of similar. I mean, they don't need to be cookie cutter versions of each other. Math may do it in one order, social studies may do it in a different order, but we still have some kind of thread of unity throughout the essay. This section's approximately 700 words long. And that brings us to another survey. So Tammy, if you would launch survey question 2, please. So I know I have at least one middle school out there. It may be possible that that middle school wasn't available at this time. Speaking of this time, you know, we make it at 4:30 in hopes that you're finished with bus duty by then, but we realize that not everybody's going to be available at the same time. So this is being recorded, and we will make it available online so that the people who couldn't be here and the other people from your district who couldn't be here can go back and watch it. So we do have participating with us 81% elementary schools and 19% high schools. What you are, the way you answered that question is going to affect the rest of your answer to question 1. In a separate essay, not just tacked on to the end of question 1 essay, but in a separate essay, if you're a secondary school, you also need to write a paragraph or 2 that draws clear connections between your curriculum and college and career readiness efforts. So I want to stress again, this is question 1.A. It is not part of your same narrative of question 1. This one needs to be separate and very specific. I think the next one is another survey question. Tammy? All right, one would expect those high schools not to offer preschool for 3 or 4-year-olds, but a lot of our elementary schools do, possibly even all of you. We can't really tell that from these results. So those of you who do offer pre-K for 3 and 4-year-olds, you have another bonus question. This is question 1B, and I'll say the same thing to you that I said to the high schools about it being a separate question. You need to write about the core curriculum that you teach in your preschool. We need to know, come away from reading this essay, that you teach reading and math, or that you also teach science and social studies, or that you also teach, I don't know, languages other than English, art, whatever you cover in your preschool grades. We need to understand that. And then this part's very important. We need to understand how what you teach in those grades is aligned to the TEKS for K3 and what impact you've seen on student success in the students who participate in your preschool program. How do you see those students doing in kindergarten and first grade? Possibly even how do you see them doing in contrast with students who didn't participate in your preschool, if you have those as well. And that section, here it is. It's also about 100 words. The next question in curriculum section is about the other programs, what we in Texas refer to as the enrichment programs. And I want to make it very clear that, again, you have to touch on each and every one of these. You can't write about your favorite. enrichment program or your most successful enrichment program, we need to read about fine arts. We need to read about health and or PE. We need to read about your technology instruction, and I'm going to talk more about that one in a minute. And if you have a languages other than English program, you need to talk about that as well. That's required if you teach 7th grade or higher. And so obviously we're going to see that section in any school that teaches 7th grade or higher. But for the rest of you, it's optional. If you have it, you need to write about it as well. And you can include any other areas too. If there are other areas besides these 4 that you have room and time to write about, that's great as well. You need to, again, go back to how are you teaching the TEKS? How are you teaching the TEKS in fine arts? Not just a description of what cool stuff you do, although we want to hear about that, but how do you teach the TEKS? And then these last 2 are bullets that Texas schools often just ignore because we operate a little differently than a lot of schools in other states. I happen to know that your students study these courses in each and every grade. Chances are good your students participate in these courses every day, or at least every other day, or maybe for the very younger grades twice a week. But you need to say that. You need to say it out loud because that's not true in all states across the nation. And remember, this is a national application. So we need to be able to read exactly in your application that students in grades K through 5 all study fine arts in various and sundry ways. And then you're going to describe those ways. So let me come back to this slide and this particular bullet, technology, which means computer science. One of the most common mistakes that we see is districts in this section describing the way they use technology for instruction instead of describing the way they teach the computer science TEKS to their students. This is not the place to describe your whiteboards and your interactive devices and your one-on-one tablet program. That doesn't belong in this section. That belongs in a different section, and we'll get to that. This is the place to talk about how you teach your students the computer science TEKS. Okay? That's really very important. This section's about 700 words long. Before I move on to the next section, if you'll bear with me a little bit here, I'll see if there's any questions I can respond to. Stephanie asked about the fact that her students at the early college high school take languages other than English at their partner college. That is absolutely fine. That is part of your program. And so the fact that they do that in that way is one of the things you're going to want to talk about. And then I'm asked for an example of how are we teaching the TEKS. It's hard to give a concrete example of that, but every one of last year's applications met that requirement. And so what I would suggest, if you haven't already, is go read some of those applications, focusing, and I know that some of you have already done this because some of you have already communicated with me about this, and I know we already suggested it. If you haven't done it, that's an important suggestion that we make. But even if you have, go look at this particular section and see if you can answer the question, how are they teaching the TEKS? How is this curriculum aligned to the Texas Essential Knowledge and Skills after you've read the answer? Hopefully the answer is yes. We at TEA provide you feedback when we think you're not doing that, but we don't then reread your application to be absolutely certain that we think you have done it. But hopefully you'll get some concrete examples from reading the answer to this question in some of those applications that exist out there. So that said, let's move on to question 3, instructional methods, interventions, and assessments. Now this may be where you want to talk about your whiteboards and your one-to-one tablets, because maybe those are instructional methods or interventions that you use with your students, either all of them or some of them. I would actually start this section, or I would suggest that you consider starting this section by talking about assessments. What kinds of assessments do you use in your school that inform instruction and improve student learning? Think about those screening tools that help you see which kids may need further diagnostic assessment. Think about the, even the STAR test, which helps you identify students that may need additional help. Think about your GT program and what kinds of assessments let you identify students for participation in that GT program. Identify students as having those special learning needs. And once you've talked a little bit about what assessments you use and how you use that data and how that data then drives your instructional decisions, then you can move into talking about the instructional decisions. What kinds of interventions are provided with that section or with that data? The various instructional methods and interventions used to meet diverse individual needs of students and to achieve instructional goals. Generally, they're going to want to see a connection between that data and those instructional methods. Here's some examples of the kinds of things you might write about: tiered instruction, differentiated instruction, problem-based learning, technology-based support, like I said a minute ago, those tablets, other kinds of instruction. You need to make sure that you address how these methods are used with multiple groups, not just those that are performing below grade level. So we want to read about your special instructional approaches for your struggling students, your special instructional approaches for your middle of the road students, and your special instructional approaches for your high-performing students. We want to see an assortment of clearly described techniques. We also want to see examples of when they're used. Are these particular instructional approaches provided to students in the morning before school, or every day during some kind of advisory class, or on demand when something comes up that lets you know the student needs some additional instructional approaches at any given time? That's just 3 examples. You may have lots of others. I just want to make sure that I hit all of those slides. I apologize for kind of getting lost in that section. Okay. New survey question. Do you have performance gaps between any one subgroup and the all student group? Wow, that's some really close results there. It's just almost 50-50 between those of you who do, which is understandable. That's one of the things we struggle with. And those of you who don't, congratulations, by the way. Some of you, of course, this year, for the first time ever, were nominated as Closing the Gaps schools. So while you may not now have performance gaps, this is a good place to talk about how you got to this point when you had maybe strong performance gaps 5 years ago or 6 years ago, and now you've closed those gaps to the point where you've been nominated as a blue ribbon school. But if you do, any of you, have current, in existence now, gaps of 10 or more percentage points between the test scores, we're talking state assessments here, of all students, and the assessment scores of any subgroup, then you need to talk about what you're doing to close those gaps. You may not have closed them already, but you've identified that you have them. You know this is a problem. What steps are you taking to close those gaps? For you closing the gap schools, this is a nice place to address that. Whatever you've done to close those gaps over the last 5 years, but this is not, this question is not specifically directed at you. It is specifically directed at anybody who has a 10% or more gap in performance right now, as of your 2017 STAR assessment results. This section is approximately 700 words long. I'm pausing to look at questions. Okay. Part 5 is school supports. So this is backing off a little bit from curriculum and instruction. Before we go into it, I'm going to ask survey question 5. I expect I know, I hope I know the answer to this question from every one of you. Does your school provide a safe and positive learning environment? Yes. All right, we're just moving right along because we all know the answer to that is yes. Otherwise, you wouldn't be in this situation of having been nominated as a blue ribbon school. This is the section where you get to talk about how you provide that safe and supportive learning environment. So question 1, you're going to talk about how you motivate and engage students and teachers. In doing that, you're going to make sure you talk about how does the culture promote student academic growth, not just social and emotional growth, but academic growth, and then also social and emotional growth. The biggest mistake I see in this section is skipping over the academic growth and focusing, because of the title of the section, School Climate and Culture, focusing on the social emotional. So make sure you address academic growth as well. And then I also see these bullet points skipped over in a lot of narratives. So you're going to want to make sure that you directly address how does your culture make teachers feel valued and supported, and how does it support the development of teachers? Think about key words here: teachers, valued, supported, development. What do we see in the culture that you've established in your school that contributes to that? Makes a clear connection between a positive environment for students and staff and how that environment makes the school successful. So this is that connection piece. You can describe all you want what the environment is like, but you've got to connect it back to how does that help with school success. You've got about 400 words to do this in. That leads us to survey question 6. Choose the best response for your school. To what extent do volunteers and community partnerships contribute to your school's success? Major role, some community partnerships. I think this answer is worded a little differently in the poll. And outside contributors play a minimal role in our success. So this is an interesting response. We've got about 73 that say they help, 73% that say they help with the success, 22% that they play a major role, and 11% that say they play a minimal role. For those of you who are in that 11%, this is going to be a harder question to answer. For those of you who are in that 22%, this is going to be an easier question for you to answer. Here's what it's asking. We want to see successful strategies that you use to engage family and community members for student success and school improvement. And you're going to want to make sure you hit each of the following. Concrete examples, there's that phrase again, of strategies and activities that encompass family and community. By community, we mean businesses, we mean churches, we mean institutions of higher education, we mean museums, we mean parks and rec, any other non-school entity that you partnership goes into this answer. And like I've said before, we want to see not just a description of this great partnership, but also how does that lead to student success or school improvement. It may be that it's all about your parent volunteers, and that's fine. You're not certainly required to have partnerships with any of these other entities. But if it's all about your parent volunteers within the school, describe that volunteer program to us in detail and make sure you link it to student success. How does it help? Not just how does it make life easier for the teachers or make things run more smoothly, but how does it help with student success? And if you can describe these other kinds of partnerships, that's great as well. You've got about 400 words for each of the questions in this section, I believe. Survey question 7. What is the driving factor behind your school's approach to professional development? Identified staff needs, identified student needs, increasing content knowledge for your teachers, increasing pedagogical knowledge for your teachers, or all of the above. Oh, and I love that response. 100% of you chose all of the above, and that is exactly what USDE wants to see. And in this question response, they want to hear about it. The narrative gives an analytical overview of the school's professional development approach that demonstrates that the school has a thoughtful, cohesive program and discusses its impact on the capacity of teachers and administrators. So if your answer to this is a list of different kinds of professional development or places you go to get professional development, that doesn't answer the question. We want to come away from reading your answer to this question understanding your comprehensive plan, understanding that your school has carefully crafted a multifaceted plan for professional development and how you develop that plan and what it entails. You need to make sure that you focus on teachers, but also on administrators. Professional development isn't just for teachers. It is also for your principal and your assistant principal and your counselors. So make sure that you're focusing on both of those groups of people. It needs to describe the connection between your professional development and the TEKS. This is a very specific part of this question that you don't want to skip over. Professional development in classroom management is awesome. Professional development in the use of new technology for assistive instruction or intervention, that's awesome too. Professional development in all kinds of things. Collegial coaching, all of that's very, very beneficial. But how do you train your teachers to really teach the TEKS? What do you have in your professional development portfolio that connects directly to the TEKS? You need to describe the various activities and approaches used for professional development and sources that the program draws from. Does all your professional development come from the regional ESC? Probably not a good idea. You probably need to branch out and find other sources for professional development. I will tell you that I remember reading one narrative to this, in response to this question one year, I don't even remember which one, that talked about your giving professional development, but not about your receiving professional development. Talking about providing professional development to other schools is awesome, but you want to make sure that you talk about how you're developing your own teachers. Describes activities that reflect the nature of the school's challenges and how they're being addressed, because the early college high school teachers are going to need one kind of professional development. The elementary school teachers are going to need another kind. The school with 92% English language learners is going to need a specific kind of professional development. The school with 98% low SES population is going to need special professional development. Think about your school's situation, your indicated needs of your students and your indicated needs of your teachers, and how you match that to the professional development. I feel confident that you do, or you wouldn't be part of this group of 26 schools. But think about how you can describe that in this narrative. Also needs to directly talk to us about how those professional development opportunities impact staff capacity, student achievement, and school improvement. We need to see all three of those things touched on. Remember, I've said this several times already. Everything needs to roll back to how does it affect student success. You've got approximately 400 words. Like I said, I think that's true for each question in this section. Survey question 8. How many people are in administrative positions in your school? Okay, so it looks like most of you are small schools with 2 to 3 administrators. I don't know if this question's easier to answer that way or easier for you large schools that have 7 or more administrators. But what you want to focus on this question is the leadership structure and the roles of those administrators. We're looking very specifically for how is that leadership structured. I'm sure that everybody just doesn't come to work individually and do his or her own thing, but that your leadership team, whether it's a team of 2 or a team of 10, works together and has some kind of organizational structure. We want to hear about that organizational structure in the answer to this question. We want to make sure that you're talking about roles rather than individuals. We don't want to hear about Mrs. Smith and how awesome she is. We want to hear about the role of the principal and what the expectations for the person in that role are, and what the performances of the person in that role are. I thought this one was amusing. This is straight out of the USDE document, one of them or the other. It's not a biography of the principal. Believe it or not, I've actually read responses to this before that did seem like just that. Did seem like sort of the personal story of the principal. That's not what they're looking for. They're looking for the administrative leadership team and how it functions. We need to make sure that we see how that leadership ensures that policies, programs, relationships, and resources focus on student achievement. This is that connection again back to student achievement. Whatever kinds of policies, programs, relationships, resources you have in place for your leadership team, how do each and every one of those focus on student achievement? We want to see a leadership philosophy. This can sometimes be implied and come across very successfully, but my advice is typically to make sure you've got a concrete sentence in here that identifies your philosophy for us. If you don't feel like you have a leadership philosophy, I bet you're wrong. I bet you really do. You may just never have clearly articulated it before. Now would be the time to do that. And it demonstrates that the school has a unified, well-functioning team of leaders. Again, like I said, you don't just all come to work separately and do your own thing. 400 words, yet again. And now we're getting to the very end. This is not a survey question yet, and I'm going to ask Tammy not to launch the survey question yet. But right now, each and every one of you, if you're especially sitting with someone else in a room, turn to that someone else and tell them the one aspect of your program that you would never change. The one most effective, the single most effective strategy that you use. And I'm going to give you 5 seconds to do that. And now I'm going to ask Tammy to launch the survey question. Uh-oh. Tammy, I'm only seeing the answers. I'm not seeing the question. So this should start with naming that one aspect was, and your choices are super easy, tricky, but I did it, or impossible. I am really glad to see that nobody said impossible. It seems like sometimes that is, in fact, the right answer because we have so many great programs and strategies, and we're so proud of them all that it's really hard to put our finger on just one. But it looks like every one of you was able to name just one, and that's good because in this last narrative, you're going to have to talk about that one strategy. The one strategy or practice or program that you think is the most important factor in your school's success. The one practice, whether academic, assessment related, or social emotional, used by the school that is the key factor in making your school so successful. And if you already know what that one aspect is going to be, and it looks like 100% of you think you do, then this is going to be an easier question to answer. You're going to describe only that one practice, but you're going to describe it in depth with a thoughtful analysis about why it's so important and why it's so crucial to your success. And of course, like I've said 900 times, connects that practice to student outcomes. How does that practice lead to student success? And you've got 400 words to do that in. So I'm going to pause and see if there are any questions I can answer. It looks like. Here's a question back from the performance gap question. If we do not have a performance gap, do we need to state that we do not? No, because you're going to have that data in section 2. Remember, where you provide specific data for your school. And so you do not necessarily have to say we don't have a performance gap. On the other hand, not having a performance gap is something you should be really proud of. And so it certainly wouldn't hurt to say something like, these practices have led us to success so that all of our students and all of our performance groups are equally successful. So this next question that just popped up, can we submit our application to you for feedback early on? I'm going to answer that here in just a few minutes. So let's talk about, this is the last section of the evaluation that we provide to you. You cannot, let me rephrase. You can submit your application anytime, but we encourage you to submit it the day before the TEA review begins. We sent you that date in the same email that you got telling you in the same email that gave you the date of this webinar. If you don't have that date on your calendar, let us know, and we'll probably nag you quite a bit between now and then anyway to make sure that you're all alert to that date. But here's the way that review works. We set off all day Friday. We have a team of expert reviewers. These are people who have been reviewing USDE applications for years. Usually we're joined by one or two new people, but we conduct training for those one or two people and also retraining for the rest of us to make sure that the review group is on target and that everybody in the review group knows exactly what to look for. That review group is going to have a rubric on an Excel spreadsheet with all of the same information in it that I've provided to you on these bullet points. So basically these bullet points go into the spreadsheet. Each reviewer says, yes, you did this. No, you did not do this. Oh, it was kind of unclear. You sort of tried to do it, but I'm not really sure that you were successful. And then we send that review back to you. We only have the resources to review once, and so you can't expect try after try after try. You need to get your application to be as good as you think it can possibly be, and then submit it by the deadline, but we will review them in the order in which they come. So if you the review day starts on a Friday. If you submit on Thursday morning, chances are very good that you'll get your review back on Friday. We're pretty fast. We get faster the more applications we review, but we've had a lot of experience, and so we have a fast turnaround time. We will return, if you turn it in by the deadline, we are committed to returning it to you with the evaluation by the close of day Wednesday. Now, sometimes I will admit the close of day Wednesday for us for that review week is like 9 p.m., but that's because we are willing to put in whatever kind of time that it takes to get everybody's review done. We give ourselves a weekend and we work on that weekend. But don't submit it so much early. You know, early submission's good, but just one day is really all you need to make sure that you're at the top of that stack of reviewers. Don't submit it days ahead of time. And so then we will review it for all of those things, but we will also review it for overall quality. And these are the things you need to make sure you address for overall quality of your application. You do not use any individual's names. Mrs. Smith is never mentioned. It's always the principal or the lead counselor or our academic coach. The narratives must be written in third person, and the examples I just gave weren't in third person, so bad on me. What that means is that you don't talk about our school. You don't talk about what we do. You talk about what I'm groping what Smith School does. At Smith School, this happens. So everything's got to be in third person. We don't want to see any I or we pronouns. That is a USDE requirement. None of these things, by the way, none of these things are TEA requirements. These things are all USDE requirements and tips we've picked up about strong answers from the years that we've spent reading these narratives. This is a really important one. The narratives do not include the names of any specific products instructional materials, or vendors. So we don't want to see, and I'm going to use a kind of common example, think through math in your narrative. We don't want to see iStation mentioned in your narrative. What do we want to see instead? A description of the kind of program that you're using and talking to us about. Any proper nouns that are names of vendor-provided products, USDE will send it back to you and say, take these out. So you might as well take them out before you ever even send it to us. No mention of any of those kinds of brand names. We don't want you to come across as though you're promoting commercial products. Now, there are a few examples, exceptions. They are exceptions that are so commonly used that you really can't avoid mentioning them. One of those would be AP courses. So AP is a brand name. It's owned by College Board. AP exams cost schools money, but it is so common and so built into our high school programs that you can't describe an AP program and let anybody really know what you're talking about. So you can use AP. You can use IB. You can use AVID, because AVID is kind of the same sort of thing. It costs money, it's a program, but it is such a big part of so many of our schools' programs that you really can't avoid actually naming it. Okay? That's about it. Those are the 3 examples I can think of. Oh, 2 more. SAT, ACT. Again, so commonly used that you can't just describe those. You really pretty much have to name them. So those are the 5 examples or exceptions I can think of. The narratives are clearly written and easy to understand. If you write the narrative, you can't really judge how clearly written and easy to understand it is. And this is why we strongly recommend the use of a team that writes together, a team that edits together, and then the use of people who weren't even involved in the writing, who can use our rubric or these bullet points and go through and say, yeah, this is remarkably clear. I finished reading this narrative and I have a perfect understanding of what you're trying to describe. Or, I think I know where you're trying to go, but you didn't quite get there. Or this sentence is really confusing. The narratives are free of grammatical and mechanical errors. My staff can tell you that I am a grammar fiend and really persnickety about these kinds of things. I cannot copy edit your essays for you, but I strongly recommend that you get somebody who can. And I don't mean your senior English teacher. I mean a professional copy editor. Copy editing is a very specific and unique skill. It's not the kind of thing that any English teacher can do. I promise you it's not. So go ahead and budget the appropriate amount of money or get the best copy editor locally you can find to volunteer his or her time as a donation to the school and take advantage of that. The bullets, and this is another USDE requirement, do not include formatting. The narratives do not include formatting such as bullets, bolding, underlining, italicizing, etc. None of that will transfer into the USDE portal. So everything's got to be written in paragraph form. You can't have any list. Italics doesn't work. Bold doesn't work. You've got to find other ways to do to emphasize things. Acronyms are spelled out the first time they are used. So you're going to mention the TEKS lots of times during the course of this application. The first time you mention the TEKS, you're going to write out Texas Essential Knowledge and Skills, and you're going to put in parentheses TEKS, and then from then on, you can just refer to TEKS. And that's true of any acronym that you incorporate, even if it's like a local acronym within your district or even just within your campus. Maybe you've got a really cool Friday program that you happily refer to as POP. Well, POP stands for something. So the first time you refer to that program, write it out in full. Then you can put POP in parentheses and you can use POP from then on. Here's the timeline. Friday, March 16th is when your applications are due to us. That is the day that we do that training that I told you about a few minutes ago. I will have an office full of curriculum experts in my office at 8 or 9 o'clock Friday morning. We will go through the training. We will go through one application together in order to calibrate and make sure that we're all going to be providing you with consistent reviews. And then we will start what we refer to as the Blue Ribbon School review window. And that's that window of Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, where we put reviewing Blue Ribbon applications above everything else. We'll return those to you as long as you meet that Friday 5 o'clock deadline by the end of the day on Wednesday. Remember, sometimes our Wednesday is a little long, so don't get antsy if you don't have it by 4. And then on March 30th, your applications are due to USDE. The only way to do that is to copy them from the Word document you used to create them, paste them into a simple text format, and then copy them and paste them into the USDE portal. Megan is the person who can help you with that if you get stuck. So I mentioned at the beginning of this, we have 2 helpers, Megan Bermia and Tammy Bright. Tammy's running this webinar. You may see emails from Tammy. Megan is the one who runs the review process. She's the one who assigns your applications out to us, and she's the one who can help you with getting that final application pasted into the portal. What Megan cannot do and what Tammy and I cannot do is help you with the portal. The portal belongs to USDE. If you have trouble getting the portal to do what you want it to do, or you suddenly find yourself locked out, you have to call USDE. We can't help you with that. USDE Help Desk can be contacted at this link and at this link and at this phone. Megan is the person to contact if you need help with your application that is kind of technical. I'm the person to contact if you have bigger picture or curricular kinds of questions about your application, and we will both be more than happy to help you. You see our email addresses there. You can also call us there. And then I'm just going to back up and point this out again. Really, if you haven't already, go to USDE's site and spend some time reviewing applications that have been successful. So that is the end of my presentation. I'm going to go to the questions and see if I can answer some of those. Here's one. If there is overlap in responses from one question to another, should we not repeat info, or is it fine? You should assume that the reader has read the previous or the earlier response, which means that you can mention the program. So for example, in that first, this is our school introduction, please get to know us, make our best first impression, you're very likely to refer to the program or the strategy that you talk about in that very last question, the one that goes in depth to the single most important strategy. So at that point you can say something like, you know, as was mentioned in the answer to question 1, this is something that our school implements very, very well. Or maybe you talk about a program in the curricular section and you want to refer back to it in your safe environment question. Maybe you described it in great detail in the curriculum question and you can just refer to it in the safe environment question. I wouldn't encourage you to just not repeat it, because if it's appropriate to talk about in any given narrative, you don't want to leave it out. But you don't want to say the exact same thing that you said about it earlier. Next question. Our school offers a dual language, two-way bilingual program. Should we address that as a part 4 under foreign language? You could. I think that's probably a very appropriate place to address that, because your students are, in fact, studying a language other than English through the use of that two-way bilingual program. The next question is, we are on spring break for the due date. Can we submit our application earlier? This is something we struggle with every single day. We know when you're on spring break. We totally understand. But we can't change USDE schedule, and so we just ask you to try to find a way to work around spring break. The actual question is, can we submit our application earlier? Always. Megan's not going to turn away an application and say, no, you may not submit until this time. I'm just telling you what best practice is, which would be the day before. So if you can submit it, if you can get it ready before you go on spring break, okay, fine. I'll tell you a secret. Even if you submit it late, like on Monday after spring break, we're going to review it. But we're not going to promise to have it back to you by the end of the day Wednesday. Okay? So the only way to be assured that you have that full week and a half between TEA's review and when it's due to USDE is to submit it by the deadline. So it's a soft deadline in the sense that we're not going to turn it away. We're still going to review it. We're just not going to necessarily get it back to you. You're going to have a shorter window to respond to our review. Next question. STAR is a criterion-based assessment. Can we use that in place of the national norm reference test in Part 8? Part 8 is only for private schools. You're not doing Part 8. That is something that private schools that nominate themselves do. You do not have to do it. The next question is, should we use TAPER or district PEIMS snapshot to fill in demographic data? Part 2. My answer is going to be PEIMS. We're never going to go check, but let's just pretend somebody did. I would want the data that you're reporting to USDE to match the data that you're reporting to the agency. The deadline for review week, I believe I've already covered that. How early can we submit our application? And I think I've already covered that. So those are the questions that have come in. If I accidentally missed one, Tammy will point that out to me after we go off the air, and I'll make sure that I contact and that I answer it in some kind of blast email that is sent to all of you. Unless anybody wants to throw a new question on there really fast, I believe we will wrap this up. I really appreciate you coming. I really appreciate your time. I really appreciate your doing everything that you possibly can do to make this Blue Ribbon School nomination turn into an actual Blue Ribbon School designation. Remember that we are here to help you in any way that we can. So reach out to us, feel free to call us, and we'll do what we can do for you. And now it is 5:47, so I'm going to stop talking, and you guys can hopefully make your way home and enjoy your evening. Thank you again so much for coming.